the most wholesome experience you've had with a stranger? Story 1. I'm a wheelchair user. At a baseball game, a little girl came running up to me and climbed onto my lap. Her mom was apologetic, but I told her it was fine, no worries. Looking at the girl's face, I could tell she had some kind of developmental disability. Mom explained to me that the little girl's grandfather used a wheelchair and she missed him. I rolled around a little to give her a ride. She giggled and had a good time. Then she climbed off and went back to her mom. Story 2. I had a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there was a stranger with a gift card to a local garden store for me. Apparently her kid had been pinching tulips from my garden every day to give to his mom, and they wanted to pay for them, once they figured out whose garden they were coming from. I had thought squirrels were doing it and had regretted planting them the year before, not being able to enjoy them. I spent the gift card on more bulbs. Story 3. I had just lost my job and my dad had his card stolen. He was waiting on the bank but completely out of food and living in an old run-down RV. I would have figured something out. I'd die before I let him starve. Right as he's almost in tears talking to me about it, someone knocked on the door. A lady had food for someone in an RV, but those people had vacated the parking lot and she wanted to know if my dad needed any. Some sort of local helping hands org. There was everything from canned goods to fresh meat, milk, pasta, everything. She had bought it with her own money and didn't want it to go to waste. I'll never forget the timing, or her generosity. Story 4. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon just came out in theaters. I had been planning to go see it on my next day off. I didn't have a car so relied on the bus. The day of the movie came and there was a snowstorm. I walked downtown to get the bus, but there was a sign saying all buses canceled due to snow. I was super bummed out and walked over to the local coffee shop. I ordered a coffee and was telling the owner how disappointed I was that I couldn't get to the movies. There was an older woman sitting in the shop and she overheard us. She looked at me and said, "I really want to see that movie too. Let's go." I'll drive. So that the day me and a perfect stranger went out to lunch and to see a movie together. About a year later I started seeing this guy in town, and his downstairs neighbor was the lady who took me to the movies all those months earlier. We had stopped by her house for her to get a sweater before the movies. I told the guy me and your neighbor went to see Crouching Tiger together. He was like, "That was you." She went on and on about how cool it was to go to the movies. Story 5. On my honeymoon in Greece, we nearly got stranded driving our little scooter back from a day trip. Finally found a petrol station in this village, but it was during afternoon nap siesta time. We apologized as best we could in the little Greek we knew. The guy obliged but looked a little annoyed. He casually asks where we are from and we tell him New Zealand. His face lights up and is amazed because he had never met someone from NZ before. He asks us what are we doing so far away from home. We tell him that it's our honeymoon. He tells us to wait there and comes back with a bottle of wine that's obviously worth more than the 6 of petrol we are buying. He refuses for us to round up the bill or for us to buy anything. He just tells us honeymoon is honeymoon. Be happy. Go. Hands down one of the best highlights of our trip. Story 6. When I was 16, I'd taken my mom's old Pontiac Bonneville to the movies, and I was in such a hurry that I forgot to turn off the lights. When I came out, the car was dead, but someone left a set of jumper cables on the hood with a note that said, "I hope you make it home safely." I've never ever forgotten about that. Since then I've tried to pay that kindness forward any way I can. Edit. Thank all of you for the awards. I was about 20 miles from home and this was before cell phones were affordable, so that person saved me that night. For those asking, I'm assuming the person came out and saw my lights on and maybe even saw them running low flickering and knew there was a possibility they would burn out before I made it back to my mom's car. Even if my battery hadn't died, it was a nice gesture. Story 7. A few years ago, I was experiencing deep depression. My life was a mess. My apartment was a mess. I was a mess. For a moment, I decided to just go to the park and sit for a while, as I was really at the end of my rope and had zero idea on what to do. Out of nowhere, a kid, possibly about 3 or 4 years, comes and hands me 3 yellow dandelions and runs back to her mom. I don't know why, but I always remember that day, I went home and cleaned my apartment and made it more tidy. I wouldn't say that my life miraculously changed, but I will say that one moment of kindness that neither the kid nor the mom probably remember was one of the most memorable moments in my life. Edit. You guys realize you're making a grown-up ugly cry, right? I mean, that must be criminal. Thank you so much for your lovely comments and rewards. Story 8. When I was 18, I had a friend in the hospital with brain cancer. His time was limited. I visited him when I could. He was kind of hippie alternative. I wore a leather jacket and had long hair. I walked to his room. A nurse saw me. Without saying a word, she walked to me and gave me a long comforting hug. That's how I knew he passed. Story 9. I guess this can be perceived as pathetic by some people, and that's okay, but I used to go to school with a bunch of horrible people. I'm disabled, so I look and walk weird. Every time I'd go out for lunch to my favorite food place and see them, they'd hurl insults. Anyway, I was standing in a long queue and they were behind me. There was an old lady maybe like 70 to 80 behind them. They were making fun of my walk. I sorta can't walk straight. I had a stroke as a kid and this old lady called them a bunch of cruel twats. It was really kind of her to stand up to them. I always will remember that. Story 10. I was in London and was supposed to be flying home that day. Walking down the street with my 2 suitcases towards the tube station, nice and early on my way to Heathrow with plenty of time. Silly me didn't realize that when the sign said there is going to be a tube strike on the day you fly home, that means the tube is completely closed. I thought it just meant delays or something, I don't know. I start walking toward the bus station a few blocks away, desperately trying to come up with a plan B. A young man comes up to me and offers to help carry my suitcases. He asks where I'm going, and I say Heathrow, which is an hour away at this point in time until my flight is running short. It starts raining. He says you'll never make it there on time on the buses. He calls me a cab, then finds a little awning where we can sit and wait for the cab and stay out of the rain. He lets me use his phone to transfer money to pay for the cab. Mine didn't have service outside my home country. We just sat and chatted for 30 minutes waiting for this cab, and he made me feel so much less panicked. I just couldn't believe the kindness he showed to some random person on the street, and I've never been able to find him again online to thank him. Story 11 Edit. Thank you all for the kind words and flair, if I even know how all that works. I think this makes my most popular post ever, and I was tearing up as I wrote it. I hope you all get a random hug when you most need it. Social distancing somehow. My last job was working for the TSA. It was a pretty miserable job and most people didn't like you. I was just having a horrible day filled with personal issues and work issues, and this nice older lady asked if I was okay. I had the standard, yeah, I'm doing fine, and she asked if I could use a hug. I had a blank stare for a second, and then just hugged her. Probably the nicest thing anyone ever did for me when I worked for there. The world needs more people like her. Story 12 I was in Walmart one day and some dude was blocking the aisle where the item I needed was located. I then heard him ask a Walmart employee where the cabinet liners were. She proceeded to say she wasn't sure and started to send him to the wrong location. I nosily piped up, I know where they are. If you want to follow me I will take you to them because I just bought some last week. The man, oh okay, thank you. He followed me to the opposite side of the store and I showed him where they were. He thanked me again and I hurried back to the other side of the store to get what I needed. 5 minutes later at the self-checkouts the man showed up and I saw him just hanging around with his bag of purchases on his arm. When it came time to pay he stepped up and insisted on paying for my items. I thanked him profusely. At the time I only had $35 in my bank account and was trying to purchase food for the week. This man who I was so annoyed with helped me so much. I still tear up when I think of his kindness. I am a single mother of 2 wonderful kids and this was my miracle. Story 13 I was going to Starbucks to eat with a friend I met days ago. Suddenly a stranger about my age asked me how to go to that exact same place. So I told him that I was going there too and we started a conversation while walking. When we got to the Starbucks, we sat at different tables and I waited for my friend. He didn't appear because he had had some problems and finally he couldn't go. I asked the stanger if I could eat with him and he accepted. Now we are friends and we sometimes talk through our mobiles. Edit grammar, nope, English isn't my first language but I'm still learning. Story 14 I was traveling to the national parks in Utah. In the hotel parking lot I noticed I had a flat. I was very flustered because I was worried about the cost of replacing the tire on top of the rental company charging me extra. As I was struggling with the tire, a group of Hispanic men came over to help me out to replace. They offered me a Corona beer, and we all shared a beer, and they took me through the process, guiding me but still having me do most of the work on my own as a learning experience. They refused to tip at the end. Edit. I'll also add that this was a formative moment for someone growing up in the wealthy white South. Growing up my only interactions or memories with people that were Hispanic were moments like my parents not letting us play outside when the neighbors had a Mexican lawn crew out, my parents' complaints when the Spanish-speaking waiter messed up our order, etc. Even though I wasn't racist, that moment made me stop and think of my parents and people I grew up with in a different light. It made me go from all races are fine to wow, my parents and the people I grew up with are a major problem. Story 15 I'm sitting at a red light with my wife and son. I'm directly behind a yellow school bus full of kids. Some of the kids were just being kids and making faces out the window at cars, etc. A small group of kids were gathered near the back of the bus looking at us. All of a sudden, one kid does the Gangnam style crossing the wrists and bobbing the hands up and down part. I do it right back to him, with a huge grin on my face. Then I do the part where you stick your arm up in the air and twirl it around while moving your head back and forth. By this time just about the entire bus was watching, and as the light turned green the first heard them absolutely erupting with laughter. Best red light ever. Story 16 My card declined at a fast food place a couple years ago. The manager saw it happening and came up and gave me the food anyway. It may have come from this establishment mood rather than the unrelenting kindness of his heart, but either way it really made my day. Story 17 I was traveling from the south of England to the north of Scotland to start a new job the next morning. I had taken a train up to London and was supposed to get on an early morning flight from Heathrow. The bus to the airport, however, was cancelled and I had to make my own way using a series of night buses. However, it was about 2:30 a.m. and my phone was dead, and I had never used London's night buses before. I was young and a little scared, standing in the middle of Victoria trying to figure out the fated bus schedule when a woman came up to me and asked, "Are you all right, love?" And I explained through tears that I thought I was going to miss my flight and didn't even have an Oyster card. She looked up my route on her phone, wrote down all the possible variations of buses and trains that I would need to take, including the times. She waited with me the entire time, like 20 minutes, then when the bus came up she paid for my fare, no cash on London buses. I got out and looked to her and she shrugged and said, "Oh, I'm not getting the bus, you just look like you needed someone." I think about her every once in a while, and am incredibly grateful for her. Edited for clarity. Story 18 I was once traveling through an old town, when I stopped at a small shop to buy some packaged water. I was in my tweens at that time, so I jumped out of my car and went to buy. A very old man sat at the shop. Once I bought everything he took out an ice cream and handed it to me. As I was about to take the bottles with me, he picked the bottles himself and walked with me to the car so that I could have my ice cream. He was very old and scaly, very thin too, and once he saw that I had a younger sister, he rushed back to the shop to bring out another ice cream for her. I insisted that he take money for it, but he didn't take it and just smiled. Maybe we reminded him of his grandchildren, I presume. Story 19. Went to a bar to meet a date and got ghosted. So I'm sitting at the bar drinking alone and saw a woman being harassed by a drunk guy. I intervened and she acted as if she'd been waiting for me. The drunk got lost and the woman and I sat together at the bar for a couple hours. We had a really great time, lots of smiles and laughs. There were sparks for sure. She asked for my phone and started talking selfies. So I took it back from her to get some better photos. Probably captured 50 or so, some really candid ones and some silly poses. After we laughed about the photos, she got up to leave. I asked for her number and if we could go out sometime, but she declined. She thanked me for the wonderful night and said something along the lines of let's just leave it at this and enjoy the memory. Somehow I felt okay with that. I kept her photos for several years and every time I saw them they instantly brought a smile to my face. I never even knew her name, but it was one of the best dates of my life. Story 20. I've shared this story before, but I'll never forget this experience. When I was a kid we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1, so I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away and I went back to my piles able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading. This was probably 22 to 23 years ago, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. Story 21. I moved 1,000 miles away from everything I knew after graduating college 16 years ago. Back then I was pretty homesick, struggling in my career and figuring things out, so I felt pretty lost in life. One day I was walking around downtown Orlando when an older man probably in his mid-80s stopped me. He handed a piece of paper that he was carrying to me and said, "You seem like a good person with a good heart. It will be all right." Then he just walked away, looking down. That piece of paper was a copy of a handwritten page by him filled with dozens and dozens of sayings, illustrations and quotes from all over the world regarding love and hope. Tears came immediately and I put it away to read later that day. It stayed on my wall in my home for the better part of 10 years until I moved again. Now it's been 16 years since then and sure he's moved on to the next world by now. I still have that page, take it out occasionally and think about that wonderful man from many years ago who taught me about pure and genuine random acts of kindness right along with love and hope. He was an absolute blessing to me and to our world. Thank you, good sir, you are a beautiful soul. Edit. Thank you so much for all of these awards and acknowledging this man and his heart. I'm so deeply honored to have been able to share his memory with you all and how he changed my outlook on life. With the state that everything is in now, I can't tell you how much I needed to both share this compassionate moment and also remember it myself. I'll try to post the page as soon as I can pull it out from storage, but it may take me a little bit. You all deserve to hear those words too. Remember, no matter what happens in our lives, hope and love will always prevail. Hugs. Story 22. Once went out to a restaurant for a meal. Earlier the same day we found out that one of my partner's relatives, someone they were close to, had killed themselves. We thought it would be a good idea to get out of the house and distract ourselves. Our waitress was lovely and spoke to us throughout the meal as it was quiet and she seemed fun. At the end of the meal and many wines, my partner was visibly emotional, not crazy. Just sad looking. The waitress asked us if we were okay and saw that my partner was upset. So she asked again. We told her what had happened. She was shocked and it was obvious she really felt for my partner. A few minutes later, she came over with some limoncello shots and said it's on the house, which was unexpected and lovely. We protested a bit, but she said, "I'm managing tonight. It's little things like this that make me like working here, because I can make your night a bit better." What a legend. It gets even more lovely though. We asked her for the bill shortly after, and when it arrived, it read 0000. She had discounted the whole bill, putting it through as wastage. We were shocked and had a tearful goodbye with her after many protests and finding it unbelievable. Wed had a 3-course meal, wine and beer, loads of sides. We went to town and she just covered it because my partner was sad. I'll remember it forever. She could have kept herself to herself and ignored us, but that moment of kindness meant much to us that day and turned it from a shitty day to a less shitty day. Story 23. About 10 years ago, me and my sister as young adults had a little girl on the bus to Disneyland sign something and take a picture with us because we needed a signature from a real princess on our trip to make all of our friends at home jealous. I thought little one was going to die of excitement. She was so cute. But once we got done with our autograph, she lectured us saying, "You know, you two could be princesses too. You're nice and you are at Disneyland. You just need a crown." We were fresh out, so she conducted our coronations right then and there. "I'll have you all know that I am Princess Gardenia Guardian." Louisa said so. Also, her parents were so nice they tried to buy us lunch afterward. It just warms my heart thinking about. I hope she's still growing up happy and sweet. Story 24. I was flying between Melbourne and Brisbane and found myself sitting next to a nun not much older than me. We chatted for the whole 2 hours about life, death and infinity. It was really pleasant, much more than I thought it would be. As we were landing, after we exchanged goodbyes, she looked me straight in the eyes, touched me on the arm, and said, "God bless you." I felt uplifted and strangely humbled, especially as I am an atheist. Story 25. I was in Edinburgh, traveling alone. I met some guys at the hostel and we went to a club, but it was weird, so I came back to the hostel. The hostel is on the Royal Mile. It's 2 a.m. and there is a girl doing poi juggling. I did some poi juggling myself, so I stopped to watch, and when she stopped, started talking to her. I asked her where she was from. She said Brazil, so being a stereotype guy like I was, I asked her whether she knew capoeira. She did. So on Friday night on the Royal Mile, me and a stranger did capoeira. It was more than 20 years ago, and I still remember it. It was awesome. Story 26. Was working at a store that sells electronics. Younger kid came in and said he needed a laptop for his new business. I said, "What's the business?" He said, "It's just a clothing line, but all the jobs are given to people in recovery." And I said, "That's very admirable," and I couldn't help get teary-eyed. And he said, "Has addiction touched your life?" And I said, "Both my parents are addicts." He said, "Mine too." And then I said, "Do you want a hug?" And then we hugged for like 20 seconds and both cried a little. I sold him a laptop, wished him well, and I felt really warm and fuzzy for the rest of the day. He was a good kid. Story 27. I had been living and struggling in NYC for 3 years. When my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I decided to move back down south to be closer and help out. It was a huge, scary, life-changing decision, and I didn't know if I was making the right. Callie had been working in book publishing and trying to follow my dreams, but it just wasn't what I thought it would be. On one of my last nights in town, I got into a cab to meet someone for dinner. The eerily prophetic cab driver just looked at me in the mirror and asked, "You are leaving the city for good?" I told him I was, and he said, "Yes, you have met many fancy animals with human faces." As I got out of the car and said goodbye, he said, "Well, we have met before 1,000 years ago or so, and I expect we will again." I think about that guy a lot. And yes, moving was the right decision. Story 28. I was in a hospital, knowing I'd be there for at least a week, and possibly more. I was sick of hospital food, so I went downstairs to go across the street to the hospital subway. I was pretty far back in the hospital, 6th floor, backside of the building, labyrinth of staircases and hallways to get out the front door. The walk from there to subway took almost 15 minutes, even though it was just across the street. I waited in line, got up to the counter to order, and realized I'd left my wallet in my room. I ordinarily keep my wallet in my back pocket, but there was no need to in the hospital since I was in my room most of the time. I was exhausted mentally by that point from the stay, told them I'd forgotten the wallet, and turned to make the trek all the way there and back again. All of a sudden, a nurse behind me bought my food for me, saving me the trip and the money. I thanked him profusely. That was years ago, but I will never forget that act of kindness. Story 29. I was really drunk and started puking in the trash can in the women's bathroom since there was a line to get to a toilet. One of the girls in line held my hair up and rubbed my back, telling me I'd be okay. I drunkenly told her I loved her. I may also have been crying. "Wherever you are, bathroom girl, I still love you." Story 30. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was out riding my bike with my mom, and halfway through the trail, my bike breaks down. Anyway, we couldn't carry the bike back home since it would take hours, so we were just stranded in that field. There were a few people on the trail who saw our inconvenience, but either they didn't have any bike knowledge to know how to fix it, or they couldn't be bothered to care. At least an hour had passed before this old man, and I mean like real old, he looked to be around 80, approached us and fixed our bike free of charge. He got his hands down to the grease, and eventually after a few minutes I could start pedaling again. I thought that was a really wholesome moment, his kindness and coolness to our situation, and that's why this memory sticks to me, I guess. Story 31. On my honeymoon, we went from Venice to Slovenia. At the first train station in Slovenia, it was literally me, my wife, one employee in the ticket booth, and a Finnish couple, the man inebriated to the point where I kept muttering, "Please don't vomit on my honeymoon." We had like a 2-hour wait for our train. So naturally the drunk guy started a conversation. His name was Alex. The only place in America we had ever been to was Santa Barbara. And man, we talked a lot. At one point we danced, and before we left for our train, he gave me a kiss on the cheek. It was the best interaction I've ever had with a stranger, and I have no doubt in my mind he doesn't remember it. Story 32. There was a time once, about 2 or 3 years ago, when a young woman near me, who was talking on her cell, said, "I miss my mom." She was sad. I had a family trauma, prior to that day, and my eldest son and I had become estranged. I missed my son, and at that moment my youngest son was in the hospital from the related traumatic incident, and I was also sad. My daughter, my BFF, was also in shock and right by my side during this time, and I was there for her too. Anyway, I digress. This woman, who was similar age as my kids, ended her call. We were walking in the same direction, several feet apart. I just looked over and said, "I miss my kids too, hon. I know your mom loves you." She started crying. I just walked up to her and gave her a mom hug. She cried so hard, I was crying. We just stood there and cried in the middle of the city, total strangers. I kept telling her that love never dies, even in death. Love is eternal. We finally composed ourselves, hugged and went our way. I still think about that day. Story 33. I was working at a local supermarket doing some construction, and this little girl walks past with her dad. She stops and calls out, "Dad, look, a girl builder." Had a little chat with her and she goes into the shops. On her way out she runs back and has another chat with me. She was 4 years old, very bright little one. It was just very heartwarming how she recognized something like a female working in a male-dominated industry. I had a really bad day dealing with a builder who was being a bully because I couldn't be there first thing in the morning due to having to drop my kids off to school first. Story 34. I was in an abusive relationship and it ended with him beating me up very badly. Broken ribs, bruises and cuts all over me. He was arrested. But the process and aftermath was, it was spring and the weather was warming, but for weeks I wore long sleeves and high collars to hide the cuts and bruises. Eventually everything healed and faded except one very deep bruise on my upper arm. I had had enough of hiding them in shame, so one day I said it and wore short sleeves. I was standing in line in Walmart and noticed this rough biker-looking dude staring at me. I thought he was checking me out or whatever. Then he asked me how I got that bruise on my arm. I stumbled answering and he outright asked, "Did somebody hurt you?" For some reason I decided to be honest and not lie in shame, so I said out loud, "Yes, somebody hurt me." He looked at me and in the kindest voice said, "You did not deserve that. Whoever it was will get what's due to them one day." For some reason that was a turning point for me. I knew then that I was going to be okay. I knew that no matter how things turned out legally, that I was going to be okay. I never saw that man again, but I honestly think he was an angel sent to give me a message. Story 35. I gave a kid a Coca-Cola, and turns out he was an immigrant from South Mexico, the bad part, and he got his mom and dad to thank me for it, and we became friends for a little while. Story 36. I have bright hair, currently teal, and moved from Orlando to a very small southern town. I get the look a lot, especially from older people. I was walking through the parking lot of an Ingles one day, and an old lady, maybe 70-ish, yelled out to me, "Your hair matches your shorts. That's so cute." It kinda made my day. Haha. Once we moved into our new place, a neighbor kid knocked on my door. When I answered he asked if I had any kids. I told him that I didn't. He goes, "AW man, I just need friends," and ran off all. Story 37. For context, I'm a fat lesbian. While grocery shopping, I saw a man about my age, mid-20s, who was clearly putting a lot of effort into his appearance and it was working. He had two-tone dyed hair, one half blonde, the other black, was wearing some well-done makeup that I couldn't do, bright purple jeans, good tattoos, etc. Overall, the look worked, and had clearly put effort into it. I said excuse me and mentioned that I thought he looked very happy and confident and good. The dude began crying in the middle of the supermarket. I felt so guilty for reducing a stranger to tears like that, but he explained it was because ID made his day and he very rarely got complimented. Made me sad, happy at the same time, but mainly happy. Story 38. Once I worked at a bookstore, saw a big heavy-set dude in overalls come in and I assumed head beeline right to the gun magazine section of our store, rural area, so you kind of got a feel of where people would go once they walked in, so I didn't initially pay him much attention. I turn around from checking a person out at the main register area and he's standing there waiting his turn patiently, so I asked him what he was in need of, and he mentioned he had a book on order held back for him. He said it was the book 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. Kind of caught me by surprise that a man that looked like a country bumpkin was picking this particular book up, and in my head I assumed it was for his wife. Found the book and started ringing him up and started chatting with him, and realized the book was in fact for him. I'll never forget what he said because even though it was such a small moment in life, it changed me a little bit. He said, "I think it's important to read books like this about other cultures than ours. The news always makes the Afghan people seem so bad, but his Khaled Hosseini first book, Kite Runner, gives a good glimpse of what life was like over there and made me think twice about how I was judging those people. Talk about making me feel like here I was judging him for how he looked, and he goes and pulls this on me." I purchased Kite Runner that day and read it, and it set into motion a lot of thoughts I had about how I judge and look at others. To this day I try my best to see the position others might be in before I judge them unfairly, and I often fail at not judging people based on how they look, but I now try to remind myself when I do how unfair it is. It was only a 2-minute interaction with this man that I had never seen before and will never see again, but if it hasn't likely made me a better person as a result. Story 39. Driving on the highway, the car in front of me suddenly swerved to take an exit, and then tried to swerve back onto the highway, almost sideswiping me in the process. Luckily there was no one to my left, so I veered into the left lane and avoided an accident. A few moments later I'm passing her, and she very sheepishly looks up at me, kind of anticipating and expecting someone to cuss her out. Well, I had just learned a new road trip trick. Flipping people off is stupid, but giving them a thumbs down really stays with someone. It's the "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed" of the road. I had a huge thumbs down queued up for this driver, but when I saw her face I immediately knew she didn't mean to. She was embarrassed, and she already felt bad enough, so instead I flashed her a huge smile, dramatically and jokingly wiped sweat from my brow, and gave her a giant thumbs up. She smiled and laughed, and honestly it's one of my favorite moments in my life. Story 40. I was about 15 and crying on a step downtown because social anxiety was really a struggle for me. After a while, a girl of about 20 stopped just to ask me what was the matter. It took a lot, but I just opened up to her as she gently held me on her shoulder and wiped my tears away. As I smiled before we went our separate ways, she promised me that things would get better. I was skeptical at first, but I always remembered our words whenever I was feeling sad. I really think she might have saved me from suicide. Leah, thank you again, I will truly never forget you.